2nd of August. We have in attendance Councillor Bolton, who will chair the second item on the agenda, and we have Councillor Donnelly and Councillor Reynolds in attendance as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Masson. Welcome to those in attendance at this meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. This meeting has been convened in response to 2 requests for a review of the decisions taken by the appointed officers under the Council's scheme of delegation. I will be chairing the second review first, and Councillor Stewart will be chairing the first review second. Members of the local review body have before them copies of the review documents as listed in the notice calling the meeting. I will now ask Mr. Mark Masson, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed to conduct these reviews. Mr. Masson.
Thank you. Members have the procedure note which was circulated with the meeting papers and is intended to set out the wider framework within which the review process operates. From this, it is clear that the first task for the review body is to come to a decision on whether the review documents contain sufficient information for the case to be determined without further procedure, and by that it is meant without further information or representations. To assist, I feel it would be helpful to mention the following. Firstly, that the regulations governing the local review process require that all matters which the applicant intends to raise in the review must be set out in or accompanying the notice of review. Secondly, that the focus of the review should be on the basis of what was before the appointed officer when a decision was made, and only in exceptional circumstances will new or additional matters be permitted to be taken into account. Thirdly, to note that the modernisation of the planning system, which included revisal of the planning appeals process, of which this local review body is part, removed the previous right on the part of the applicant to insist on a hearing and replaced that with the local review body, providing them with the power to choose a procedure which more accurately reflects the facts and circumstances of the individual case. And lastly, that guidance issued by the Scottish Government's Chief Planner in 2011 stated that reviews by local review bodies should be conducted by means of full consideration of the application afresh. This review should take the form of a structured discussion led by the chairperson to consider the matter set out in the notice of review before you. And I would conclude by drawing your attention in particular to points 10 to 12 of the procedure note. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Masson. I notice that Councillor Stewart has joined us. Can I just check that Councillor Stewart, I know that you have other meetings. Are you still content if I just carry on with my one first?
Yes, Councillor Bolton, just you go ahead. It's fine. It's just there seems to be internet coming in and out, so you go with yours and hopefully mine will
settle down
here.
Okay, thanks very much, Councillor Stewart. Okay, if we could now turn to the consideration of the second review first in respect of a decision to refuse the application for the change of use from Class 2 Financial, Professional and Other Services to Class 10 Public Worship. Planning reference 210464/DPP. We will now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. I would again point out that Mr. Evans attends today's meeting to provide us with the necessary professional planning guidance because he has not been involved with the earlier consideration of the application under review. Mr. Evans will, however, not be asked to express any views on the merits of the proposed development. In effect, his role will be a neutral one involving the provision of factual information and guidance only. If I could just pass over to yourself now, Mr. Evans.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I'll just be a second sharing my screen here and get the presentation up.
Okay.
There we are. Hopefully everyone can see that. I'll just make it full screen. There we go. Okay, so thank you everyone and good morning. The case before us, first of all, today is a review against an application which was actually approved subject to a single condition, under delegated powers. And that was for detailed planning permission for, as you said, Convener, a change of use from Class 2, which is Financial, Professional and Other Services, to Class 10 Public Worship at the first floor, 41 Regent Quay, Aberdeen. That review was found to have been submitted with all the necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the decision of the appointed officer. In terms of new matters being raised, the applicant has checked the box on the notice of review form to say that new matters have been raised, but in closer inspections merely just sort of making some comment on noise issues which were pertinent to the application's determination. So I think it's fair to say not really raising anything fundamentally new there. The applicants have also expressed their view that no further procedure is required in this case to proceed to a decision. And so from there, I'll just move on to a bit of background in terms of the site and the description of the proposal. So moving on here, got a location plan. The application site's located on the north side of Regent Quay, which is within the city centre and in close proximity to Aberdeen Harbour, accessed via a small pend from Regent Quay. This two-storey attic and basement building is of a granite construction with pitched insulated roof. This application relates to the first floor of the property only, which you can just see in this next image, which currently falls under a Class 2 use. So that's financial, professional and other services. Generally covers things like sort of doctors, surgeries and solicitors' offices and things like that. What distinguishes it from a normal office use in Class 4 is that principally there will be members of the public coming to the premises. So the site's located within a mixed use area as identified in the local development plan proposals map. And no relevant planning history was identified in the officer's report. That's just a map extract from our council mapping system, so you can see how the site's set in behind the building line, accessed via a small pend here. An aerial photo which doesn't really show you a great deal because a lot of it's in shade, but there's led to believe there's car parking available either to the front or to the side of the building here, which serves the building. Oh yeah, and in fact we've got some photos that show that car parking. And some photos of the interior as well, but because we're dealing with an application for change of use, the photos of the interior are perhaps not of central importance. So just a quick description of the proposal then. There's no plans to go with this, just on the basis that it was change of use only, so I'll just leave the location plan up, or maybe this one. So planning permission sought for change of use of the first floor of the premises from that Class 2 financial, professional and other services to Class 10 public worship to allow for use as a church. No physical alterations were proposed as part of the application. So next I'll just go to the appointed officer's reasons for decision. So those are included in the decision notice, which is included in the agenda pack. I'll just go over them briefly. So again, the application was approved. The proposed Class 10 use was considered to be suitably compliant with the relevant policies of the local development plan. References the mixed use area policy, as well as those relating to transport and sustainable travel, and policy T5 on noise, as well as associated supplementary guidance. The appointed officer came to the conclusion that the proposal would not conflict with the surrounding land uses in the area, and there would be no adverse effect in terms of on-street car parking over and above that associated with the existing use. So they're sort of doing a balancing exercise between what's already approved there and what's proposed now. Worth noting that the decision was made subject to a single condition, which was recommended by the council's environmental health officers, and that placed a restriction on, as you can see in the lower part of this slide, amplified music, public announcement equipment, or noise emitted from the use of microphones or speakers, or other forms of audible entertainment, including singing or acoustic performance, taking place out with the hours of 10 p.m. Out with the hours of 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. So nothing overnight and in the early morning. And the reason for that was to protect surrounding residential properties from adverse impact on amenity. So turning then to the appellant's case, this was just included in the notice of review. There was no accompanying sort of separate statement as we often see, so it's quite short and to the point really. So this just stated that on Sundays the church would have 5 sessions for worshippers occurring at different times between 6 a.m. and 3 p.m, which in the view of the appellant helps to control capacity and limit noise, because there's not the concentration of people at one time. Whilst music and song are essential for the church's worship. They're done moderately and at levels that don't encroach on amenity. So, for example, they've cited an existing premises in London where there's no such nuisance, and the implication, I suppose, is that there's no similar restriction on the hours of use there. Also makes the point that proposed property in Aberdeen is some distance from residential homes, and therefore the activities wouldn't have an impact. I'm not 100% sure of where the nearest residential properties are, but just odd bit of personal experience. If you can see my cursor there, just hovering over number 39. Just a few years ago, I stayed in an attic flat there, so that's just sort of looking out onto the property. So I'm not entirely sure what that distance is, but I think there are some, attic and upper floor flats along the front of Regent Quay there. Right, so that was the appellant's case. In terms of consultations, I mentioned before that the Council's Environmental Health Service had specifically requested the application of that condition. Over and above that, the Roads Development Management team had noted that the property is well served in terms of its sustainable travel options due to its location relative to the city centre, suggested that associated parking provision is acceptable given the location. So there was no objection on those grounds. The local Castle Hill and Pittodrie Community Council provided no response. So that was the extent of any consultations. There were no representations received from members of the public either. At that point, convener, I'd just hand back to you for members to decide whether you feel any further procedure like a site visit or further written submissions is required. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. We now need to consider whether we have sufficient information in front of us today to take a decision on the application. Members will note that the applicant stated that no further procedures are necessary before determination. Members, remember, if you do not feel you have enough information to take a decision, you can request a site visit be undertaken, that further written information be provided, or a hearing arranged. Councillor Reynolds. Oh, you're on mute.
My apologies. No, I don't think we need a site visit, and I feel that all the information that we have in front of us is sufficient. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Donnelly.
Yes, thanks. I'm happy with the area. I used to sort of frequent down there about 30 years ago, so I know the quay and all the old bars that's beyond the quay. So I've got enough information. I know the area. I know the density of the population and down there and what goes on down there. I'm happy.
Okay, thank you. I equally am happy that we have enough information and don't require a site visit either. So with that in mind, we've got sufficient information. I'll ask Mr. Evans if he could go through the relevant policies and any other considerations. Mr. Evans. I think you're on mute, Gavin.
Sorry, apologies. I just shared the wrong program there. So
that's okay. Don't worry.
Smooth presentation. Right, there we go. A little bit better. Okay, so turning to the policy side of things then. As I mentioned before, the application site's located in a H2 mixed use area. The general thrust of that policy is in balancing residential and commercial interests. The emphasis being on the relationship between those uses and the avoidance of undue conflict. And really the onus is on whichever new use is being considered by the planning authority at that point in time to make sure that it is not prejudicing existing residential properties that are already there, or conversely, existing businesses by introducing residential in a location which is perhaps subject to noise, for example. So in this case, what we're looking at is the introduction of a use which has the potential for noise, as identified by environmental health colleagues, and we understand there to be a degree of residential use that could be affected in the area. So it's just balancing those interests off against one another. Policy T2 and T3 are also relevant to some extent. They're referenced in the Roads Development Management response. T2 is really about managing the transport impact of development. That's linked to our parking standards as set out in the supplementary guidance. But there is a priority placed on walking and cycling, especially in the city centre where there are more sustainable modes of travel available. And that's really mental blank, looking for a word, expanded upon by policy T3, which really emphasises encouraging sustainable and active travel and protecting existing sort of path links and access rights and that sort of thing. So then policy T5 is obviously quite central to this decision and the application of that condition. This just sets out that noise impact assessments will be used where there is potential conflict between uses, and there will be a presumption against noisy development being located close to noise sensitive uses. There's obviously a balancing judgment involved whether planning conditions, for example, could make something acceptable in planning terms, or whether the two uses are fundamentally incompatible in close proximity. In this case, the view seems to have been taken that subject to restriction on the hours, the uses could coexist happily. And that's that sort of principle about whichever use is being considered and introduced as new, taking the onus for demonstrating that there wouldn't be adverse impact. That's really embedded in the legislation now, following changes in the last year or two. So there's reference made to an agent of change principle. So the suggestion there is whoever's coming in is responsible for demonstrating that they wouldn't cause harm, rather than, for example, opening up new flats above a sort of live performance venue and then leading to it having to be shut down. I think is a sort of prominent example that's maybe led to that legislative change. So points for members to consider. Firstly, just in principle, do you feel that the proposed place of worship use could be accommodated in a mixed use area without adversely affecting other uses, be they commercial or residential? Do you feel that the proposal would accord with the other relevant provisions of the development plan in relation to parking, accessibility, and policy T5 on noise? And are there any other factors that you think should point towards either approval or refusal? On that central noise issue, having regard for the consultation response provided by environmental health colleagues, do members feel that any restriction on amplified music, singing or performance is warranted to protect residential immunity? And if so, what hours do you feel like that should cover? 10 PM to 10 AM are the prohibited hours in the conditions suggested by environmental health. You may decide that some sort of restriction is warranted, but the hours might be different. But that's maybe one to open up for discussion. So ultimately, coming to a view on whether you feel the proposal complies with the plan as a whole, and whether there are any particular considerations that outweigh the plan in this instance. Happy to assist if you have any questions, or if you want any guidance on use of conditions and things. And thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans. First of all, questions. Councillor Donnelly.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Madam Convener, sorry. This has been approved. I gather the applicant has refused or not accepted the approval because of the condition that they're only allowed to start singing or have music worship from 10 AM on a Sunday morning. Is that the situation? Am I reading that correctly?
That's right, Councillor Donnelly. Yeah, I mean the premises would be allowed to open for worship. It's just the singing and the noisy element that would be restricted before 10 AM.
So I've got a question. If they have got approval, they could not contravene it, but they just want it in written that they are allowed to worship and sing from 5 or 6 in the morning, basically. That's what they're asking for, yeah? And that's the end of it, yeah?
6 AM was what was mentioned at their other premises in London.
Well, we're saying no to that. So they have appealed against that decision. That's the gist of it, yeah.
That's right.
Okay, that's my question. So I'll let anybody else get in with a question. Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Donnelly. Councillor Reynolds, have you anything you wish to ask?
No, I have no questions at all. I think Councillor Donnelly has covered what I was going to ask.
Yeah, and again, I haven't got any questions. It's quite a straightforward one for me for a change. Okay, folks, well, if there's no other questions around the policies or anything else, in accordance with the procedure notes circulated, the local review body will now discuss and decide the manner in which the review is to proceed. I would highlight that all representations relating to the case have been considered and taken into account. So can I just check, members, we're happy just to discuss it and make a determination? Yeah. Okay. Councillor Reynolds, do you want to go first, or I mean, I'm happy to kick off whatever you want.
No, ladies first.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. For me, it's a place of worship where we have them embedded right across the city. I'm not aware, clearly most of these churches have been established for hundreds of years, so perhaps planning policy didn't supersede the need and rights to worship and to sing. I think if we look at this location, it's actually and quite a, if you like, a noisy location in terms of the traffic because of the road behind it in front of it. It's right next to the harbour. There's several establishments that play live music quite late into the night. Councillor Donnelly, you'll remember some of those from licensing board days. For me, I think this is an onerous condition to put onto the application, and perfectly honest, I wouldn't have any condition on it in terms of noise. I think the fact that they're happy for people to arrive in their cars or however they get there and go into the building, but just not to be allowed, you know, from 6 AM or any time, but they're just not allowed to sing. You know, my experience of certainly the churches in my ward, which are immediately adjacent to houses, that you don't hear that much. You may hear a slight background sound if they've got a door open, but generally the singing is not the volumes. And looking at the size of the rooms in there, I think that, you know, the number of people you may have singing at once will be restricted. And I think that's our whole purpose of opening it at different times of day for worship. So for me, I wouldn't be putting any condition on it, and I would just be approving the application as it is without condition. Councillor Donnelly, do you want to?
Yeah, a lot ditto to what you've said, Madam Convener. I think the way life has taken us that day, we may end up with an awful lot with the president's being set here, with a lot of officers, shall we say, having to convert into other community and economic use. And this harbour area is certainly not densely populated residential. I mean, there's a large block of social registered landlord on Virginia Street near. I used to go to the warehouse gym down there on James Street, and as the officer said, there's a few flats right on the quay, but they've got 24 hours of noise coming in from supply vessels from offshore and the harbour coming in. The ferries from the Shetlands coming at 6 in the morning. So I don't see, and I do feel it kind of tragic to kind of, it's a bit like going back to COVID again. We can open up the bars, but you can't sell alcohol. You can open up your church, but you're not allowed to sing or worship or pray. It's a bit kind of duplistic, if I use that word. So I would also think if there was anybody of the small residential population, you know, we're a bit up in arms or whatever, then we could have a word with them. I mean, we have antisocial behaviour for noise as well, don't we? If it was really out of bad, they could always go down that, and that would maybe self-discipline it. But I mean, to give people a licence to, you know, or change of use and then say, well, you can, but you're restricted, I think it's a bit duplistic. So it has been approved. Doesn't, you know, contravene any of our policies, basically. It's the concern and the worry that, you know, and again, that is covered by the fact that it's not a heavy residential area. It's a heavy industrialised area, the key in the mornings and throughout the day and the night. So I would accept the appellant's appeal and give them the full planning permission rights.
Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Convener. Excuse me. Yes, I agree again with what Councillor Donnelly is saying there. I've been down there for early morning meetings and gone past the harbour, and you hear these vehicles reversing and those bleep, bleep, bleep sounds that would waken the dead, let alone the residents of the area. Construction works. I have a lot of construction work going on in my patch. You know, there's a lot of house building going on. That starts at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's really, really noisy. I have complaints about that, but they are allowed to do it because it's part of the conditions that are applied. In this particular instance, I feel, as you two do, that the conditions in this have been a little bit over the top as far as the size of the building is concerned, and of course, as far as the type of activity that's going on within the premises. I would guess that you know, it's not like London. There is a parallel being drawn here with their London church. London starts off a lot earlier in the morning. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You know, the city is alive at 5 o'clock in the morning. I don't know whether they will actually need to start at 6 o'clock. They'll be able to gauge it themselves.
Yeah.
I think they'll probably be starting at 7 or 8 o'clock because people generally want to lie in. You know, I'm a churchgoer, but I do like a long lie. I wouldn't go to an early morning service. So I think they will actually adapt their own services to what their attendance figures are. And as you guys, I do agree that, you know, putting any sort of condition restricting the hours, particularly to 6 a.m. in the morning, is a bit draconian.
Okay. So if we just, as I say, we'll just run through the policy. So, you know, we already accepted that the application was compliant with H2, which is the mixed use area, and also that there was no conflict with T2 or T3, and that the only challenge that was being presented was around T5 in terms of was there an unacceptable noise impact. And I think from hearing from all of you that we feel that there's an existing background noise which would supersede anything that could potentially come out of the church from a bit of singing. And I think at the moment with people's mental health after COVID, I think these types of places will become far more frequented by people who are in need of a bit of solace and support. And I think that we've seen in the past the churches having to step up, and I think they'll do it again. But you know, taking the kind of any sort of religious connotation out of it, I think that, you know, for the type of people that will be frequenting it, and given the mix of use in the area that exists, I'm comfortable, and certainly by the sounds of it, Councillor Donald, Councillor Reynolds, you're comfortable that the application be approved without any condition. Mr. Evans, is there anything we've missed or you want us to pick up on?
No, nothing further from me, I don't think, Councillor Bolton. The only thing that occurred to me to mention was when Councillor Bolton mentioned antisocial behaviour or any other sort of restrictions on noise should it get to a really harmful level. There is still environmental health controls in terms of statutory noise nuisance, irrespective of whether there's a planning condition on here. So that offers some degree of comfort.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Mr. Evans, because again, you know, we do have legislation and we see it through other boards and stuff that, you know, they should be applied when they're needed rather than as a condition to resolve something that hasn't happened. Mr. Masson, do you want to do just a quick roll call of our vote just to make sure that it's amplified on the recording? Okay,
it's just to advise that it was a unanimous decision by all three members to take away the condition which the officer had implemented.
Absolutely, agreed.
Great.
Okay, thank you all very much for your attendance on this matter. I'll hand over swiftly to Councillor Stewart, who will chair the first one now. Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Thank you, Mr. Evans, Mr. Templeton and Mr. Masson. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye, Councillor Bolton.
Thank you.
Bye.
Shall we just start then, Mark?
Yes, if you could just go ahead, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks for everyone for allowing this one to go second. Internet still does seem to be a bit of a problem here, but anyway, so welcome to those in attendance at the meeting of the local review body of Aberdeen City Council. This meeting has been convened in response to two requests for a review of the decision taken by the appointed officer under the council's scheme of delegation. Councillor Bolton has now chaired the first one. I will be chairing the second one. I will ask Mr. Mark Masson, the Assistant Clerk, to outline the procedure to be followed in conduct of this review.
It's just to confirm, Councillor Stewart, I did that with the first review that was before us, so that's been undertaken already.
Okay, so do we just move on to the application itself?
Yes.
Okay, so the consideration of the first review is in respect of the decision to refuse the application for the erection of a 17.5 metre high 5G telecommunications mast and installation of associated meter cabinets with associated works at North Deeside Road at Fawdles Cult, Aberdeen, planning reference number 201501/DPP. We'll now hear from the planning advisor, Mr. Gavin Evans, who will provide us with a brief description of the application proposal and a reminder of the reasons why the application was refused. And as I know you already know, that today Mr. Evans in attendance here is to provide with the necessary professional planning information, and he's not hasn't been involved previously, and he won't actually be expressing a view on this. It's just factual information. Mr. Evans.
Thank you, convener. Yes, if everyone could bear with me a second there, and I'll just wrestle my presentation onto the screen. Full screen. There we are. So hopefully everyone can see that okay now.
Yes, thank you.
So yes, as you said, convener, before us today we have a request for review against an application refused under delegated powers for detailed planning permission for the erection of a new 17.5 metre high 5G telecoms mast, along with installation of associated meter cabinets and other associated works at North Deeside Road, Pitfoddles. The review has been submitted with all necessary information and within the time limit of 3 months following the appointed officer's decision. The notice of review form itself advises that no new matters have been raised by the applicant in making this review. So there's nothing which wasn't before the appointed officer at the time of their decision. And the was also expressed that this review may be further procedure based on the written submissions that accompany the notice of review. So in short, we're not looking for a site visit or any hearing or any further written submissions to be made. So just in terms of a description, site location. The location site is a small area within the pedestrian pavement footway on the southern side of North Deeside Road in Pitfoddles. So that lies within the Pitfoddles conservation area. The site of the proposed works is, sorry, my screen's still a bit unresponsive.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Evans, but it is kind of a bit, I'll say hissy, and it's a bit intermittent, and I don't think it's my side. I don't know if other councillors have got that.
Yep.
Councillor Reynolds, I think you've got your mic on as well. If you put off your if everybody can put off your mic while Gavin speaks, that'll maybe help.
Okay, I'll do that as well.
Or maybe not.
No, in fact, that's even worse.
For the time being.
Gavin seems to be breaking up to me here, and like freezing.
I'm not sure if that's a problem at my end. Everyone hear me okay for just now?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you're like intermittent and you're breaking up, freezing, you know, the voice, your vision sort of freezing. I can hear you.
It's really just a hiss, quite a large, loud hiss at the back.
Gavin, do you want to go off and then come back on again and see if that helps?
Yeah, sure, I'll try that, Mark. Bear with me just a sec. Yeah, I think my computer's just on go slow. Even just closing the presentation there seems to have had it freeze a little bit.
Mark, what are we going to do?
I think Gavin's maybe just he's there, but I think his presentation's maybe stalled.
Okay.
If Gavin can maybe try and speak to us. So that's Gavin leaving, and then he's going to try and rejoin again.
How's life treating you, Jennifer?
Not too bad, thank you, Councillor Donnelly. How are you?
Well, surviving. Still in the headlines, but surviving.
Well, okay, I'm surviving too then.
Hello everyone, I'm back again. Yeah,
Okay.
Sorry about that. Even I tried to close down the presentation and everything just stopped dead.
That's better, Gavin.
Right, so we just fire ahead while it's working. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what.
Can I just confirm, have we got to the point where we're going to decide whether we actually need to have a site visit or not? Or were you leading up to that bit?
Just leading up to that bit, just
okay.
yet, I'm afraid.
Okay, clarify, thank you.
All right, I'll just be a second. I just need to open the presentation again. Right, let's get while the getting's good. Okay, so I'll just click on a little bit here. So yes, hopefully everyone can still hear me okay. So I'd got as far as this. I think, yep, the site of the proposed works is immediately to the north of a large residential curtilage called West Haven. And the dwelling within that curtilage is set back some 65 metres from North Teesside Road, sitting at a lower level. With hedging and mature trees in the intervening front garden area. So that's the property that we're referring to just in here, if you can see the cursor there. The boundary to North Teesside Road is enclosed by a stone wall of roughly 1.5 metres in height, with hedging within the garden protruding a further 0.3 metres or so above the wall when seen from the public road. I mentioned before that the site's located within the Pitfoddles Conservation Area. This is the conservation area boundary just for reference, so you can see just outlined in red there is the location of our site. That's an aerial photo. So this is West Haven that I was referring to there, and the trees that sit in the backdrop, albeit at a lower level than the pavement. So this section of North Teesside Road features 10-metre high streetlight poles on the southern footway of North Teesside Road, either side of the application site, with the existing trees in the West Haven plot providing the backdrop for the proposed area of works. A denser area of mature woodland can be seen just on the other side of the road, which is in the curtilage of the International School. So this is just a street view image. I suspect that this was provided by the applicant, so I suspect that orange cone there is denoting where the monopole would be installed. So you can get a feel for the extent to which the existing trees here provide a backdrop to that, albeit the 17.5-metre telecoms monopole would be considerably higher. So this is a plan as existing, so it indicates these lower 5-metre trees in the West Haven site, and then taller trees at 10 to 11 metres further along. So you can see how that's reflected in the street view image there. So this is the image as proposed. So this is the 17.5-metre pole installed there on the sort of the wall side of the footway, along with cabinets which would open out when needed. My understanding is that these cabinets aren't frequently, access isn't frequently required, so there shouldn't be an issue with obstructing the pavement. And this is a more detailed layout plan that just shows the sort of underground routing of cables and things, which isn't something that we really need to concern ourselves with to any great degree. It's more of a technical drawing. So this is probably the plan that shows things best, the elevations. So detailed plan permissions sought here for the erection of a 17.5-metre high 5G telecommunications mast with associated cabinet. The proposed mast and cabinet would be set roughly 1.7 metres apart, and the cabinets are 2 metres high with just short of 3 metres wide and approximately 600 millimetres deep. The equipment would be installed in the southern portion of the footway close to the boundary wall enclosing West Haven, with cabinets opening outwards onto the footway when in use. So you can see in this lower image how the telecoms mast would sit relative to the height of these existing trees and also to the 10-metre height of the streetlight poles. In terms of the appointed officer's decision, that's set out full in the decision notice. Sorry, these are just individual plans that show the various bits of antenna kit that would be affixed to the pole, perhaps not central to the reason for refusal. So those reasons for refusal are firstly that the proposed telecoms development was not seen as being acceptable in principle, as its siting, scale and appearance would have an undue and adverse impact on the special high amenity and rural character and appearance of the Poddos Conservation Area, and therefore the proposal would fail to accord with policies CI2 relating to telecoms infrastructure, D1 relating to quality placemaking by design, and D4 relating to the historic environment from a Aberdeen Local Development Plan. Secondly, the appointed officer's decision refers to the view that insufficient justification had been provided by the applicant to satisfactorily demonstrate that the telecoms mast could not be feasibly sited in a less visually intrusive or sensitive location, whilst also delivering the desired and necessary 5G connectivity. So really what they're getting at there is they haven't provided a robust assessment of what the alternative sites could be for this equipment. So turning to the appellant's case, this was provided by way of a lengthy statement, which again is included in the agenda pack, and members have had the opportunity to review ahead of today's meeting. I've pulled out some of the main points. So firstly, the appellants are of the view that the proposal accords with National Planning Framework 3, as well as the advice contained in Planning Advice Note 62, which relates to the siting of radio telecoms. The proposal, in their view, is also consistent with the local development plan policies that are applicable. So that's in relation to design, the historic environment and telecoms infrastructure. The applicants also expressed their confidence that the proposed monopole and other equipment would not, by virtue of its siting and appearance, be detrimental to the amenity of the conservation area or to the area's character and appearance generally, and that suitable and robust evidence has been provided to demonstrate the need for this location. Highlights also that it's for the planning authority to conduct a balancing exercise between any harm or perceived harm resulting from the proposal in terms of its visual impact against the public benefit in maintaining and improving a high-speed mobile telecoms network. So, sorry, I'm on a little bit too far. Also included in the applicant's submission is this plan and an accompanying table where they go through the alternative locations that were considered. So the background to this application is that there's an existing telecoms mast at the Shell facility at Woodbank House, where the telecoms operator has been served with a notice to quit, telling them that essentially they'll have to find a new location, because the landowner has their own plans that don't include the siting of a monopole there. So that's the background. That's the reason for the application essentially. And in order to maintain consistent coverage, they are limited in their search area for where they can site a new pole. So these are the options that were considered. In terms of consultations, at the application stage, the Council's Roads Development Management team highlighted no objection. They noted that there would remain more than 1.5 metres of the footway free from obstruction, so that would allow for people to pass, and also that the siting of the mast would not affect visibility for nearby road junctions. So no objection from the Council's roads colleagues. The local Braeside and Manifield Community Council provided no response in relation to this application. In terms of public representations, there was one received, one objection, made the following points. Firstly, expressed the view that the mast would adversely impact on visibility from a driveway which serves the West Haven property on North Deeside Road. If I can just scroll back to a plan that shows that. So this is West Haven in here, and the suggestion is that the siting of the pole here will adversely affect driver visibility when using the access here. However, I think the orientation of this is such that you actually get a fairly open view in that direction, and that would be roads having commented on the effect on visibility from a driveway as opposed to road junctions, but it doesn't look, based on the alignment there, like there would be any real cause for concern. The objection also makes reference to the siting of the mast on the pavement, increasing the safety risk to passing pedestrians. As I mentioned, the Council's Roads Development Management team are happy that 1.5 metres in unobstructed width is retained, so there's enough there for the pavement to function to their satisfaction. The objection also states that the height of the mast would harm the setting or character of the Pitfoddles Conservation Area. On that front, there's a matter for members' judgment. You know, to what extent do you feel like this particular part of the conservation area or this area is central to the value of the conservation area, and to what extent would it be affected by this new monopole? So at that point, convener, I would just hand back to you for members to decide whether you think a site visit or a hearing or any further written submissions are required. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Members, can I ask your view whether you believe that a site visit or a further hearing should be required? I'm happy to say I don't think there should be a site visit. I can formulate a decision based on what we have. That's what I'm saying. But Councillor Reynolds?
Yes, I totally agree. I think all the information that we have in front of us, we can make a decision.
Thank you. Councillor Donnelly?
I'm happy with the North East Side Road. I've driven past up and down many times over the years I've been up here. Okay, thank you. So, Mr. Evans, we're happy just to proceed with that we. Sorry, Mr. Masson, for the minute, obviously, to note that we don't require a site visit to proceed. And then, Mr. Evans, is it now open to further discussion?
Just on to the policy summary.
The policy, sorry, I'm working between two screens here where I have my other bit printed off.
Yeah, I've had the same problem this morning, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. I'll just get this presentation back up.
I'll go back to silent, actually.
Okay, so thank you there, convener. So just turning to the relevant policies in this case, the application site's located in an area which is designated as part of the Greenbelt. So the sort of preamble to that policy sets out the sort of intended function of Greenbelt, and clarifies that no development will be permitted in the Greenbelt for purposes other than those essential for agriculture, woodland and forestry, recreational uses that are compatible with an agricultural or a natural setting, mineral extraction or a quarry restoration, or landscape renewal. So it's self-evident that none of those apply to telecoms development, but the policy does then go on to provide a further list of other exceptions. So I'll just flick onto those. So those include small-scale expansion of existing uses in Greenbelt, and then second on the list is the one that we're really looking for: essential infrastructure, including telecoms infrastructure, where it cannot be accommodated other than in the Greenbelt. And really, that's the central question for us here. Excuse me, is that telecoms infrastructure in the Greenbelt should only be put there if it's been demonstrated that it couldn't go anywhere else. So that's really what the onus is on the applicant to do. Over and above that, there is a requirement that all development in Greenbelt areas is of the highest quality in terms of siting, scale, design and materials, reflecting sort of sensitivity of the edge of settlement location. So that's really echoed by policy D1, which is focused on design quality. And the question that we would ask ourselves is, does the proposal represent a high standard of design? And does it have a strong and distinctive sense of place? Is it appropriate to its context? Policy D2 is also of relevance, just in terms of local landscape setting. So development should have a strong landscape framework which improves and enhances the setting and visual impact of a development, creates local identity and promotes biodiversity. I mean, obviously, with a telecoms mast, the prospect of enhancing and promoting biodiversity is perhaps less limited than other types of proposals. So just seeing that in context. But there is an important point about protecting and enhancing important views of the city's townscape from busy public vantage points. So to what extent do members feel like this location is visually sensitive in terms of its townscape value, and to what extent is that threatened by this proposal? And then next up is policy D4, which relates to the historic environment. So this captures both listed buildings and conservation areas. There's an overarching statement that the City Council will protect, preserve and enhance the historic environment in line with national and local policy and guidance. High quality design, which respects the character, appearance and setting of the historic environment and protects the special architectural and historic interest of its listed buildings and conservation areas, will be supported. So it's not the case that there's just a veto on development conservation areas, it's that it should be appropriate to its context and be of the highest quality that doesn't undermine the value of that heritage designation. And then from there, policy CI2 relates to telecommunications infrastructure. Policy's a bit lengthy, but some of those criteria are not so relevant as others. So the headline is that telecommunications development will be permitted provided it's undertaken in compliance with the following criteria, and those criteria are consistent with the themes established in national policy and guidance. So firstly, the siting and appearance of proposed apparatus should seek to minimise its impact on visual amenity, character or appearance of the surrounding area. So again, that's not saying it can have no impact, recognising that these things have to go somewhere, but it's about minimising that impact and making sure that we're siting things in the most appropriate location, the least sensitive location that still is capable of doing the job. The second criteria in this list applies only to proposals for siting on existing buildings, which isn't the case here. We're talking about a ground-based mast. If proposing a new mast, it must be demonstrated that the applicant has explored the apparatus on existing buildings, existing masts or other structures first, with evidence provided as part of planning applications. In relation to the discounting of alternative sites, the officer's report actually refers to the applicant's submission having discounted various sites on the grounds that they would be directly opposite high value housing and therefore would be more likely to generate strong local objection. The officer's report highlights that that's not a legitimate planning reason to discount an alternative site, and that sites should be considered and discounted as necessary on their planning merits and respective impacts or technical feasibility, rather than, if you like, how much adverse reaction they might draw. So that seemed to be questioning the basis for assessing alternative sites. If proposing development in a sensitive area, which would include conservation areas, development should not have an unacceptable impact on conservation areas or buildings of architectural or historic interest. So in assessing that last point, the officer's report makes reference to the Foddle's conservation area character appraisal, which is the document that really allows us to dig a little bit deeper into the nature of the conservation area and where its value does and doesn't lie. So that document notes reference to North Deeside Road as a tree-lined avenue, which is a strong feature of the conservation area and makes it feel more rural in character despite its location close to the built edge of the city. Notes that the road is relatively wide, however the enclosed nature offered by tree planting makes it feel narrower and more intimate as a result. Further notes that changes in rural character to certain roads is identified as a specific threat to the conservation area's character and appearance. So there's a sort of SWOT analysis within the conservation area character appraisal, and one of the threats identified was changes to the rural character of certain roads. Whether that applies to North Deeside Road or not is a matter of judgment. So in terms of other material considerations, there's sort of national planning policy as expressed by Scottish planning policy and planning advice note 62. Won't go into those in great detail. But ultimately, points for members to consider. First and foremost, do you feel that Greenbelt policy NE2 allows for telecoms development of the type proposed? Secondly, in terms of design, is the proposal of a high quality design appropriate to its context and having regard for factors such as scale, siting, footprint and proportions, that sort of thing. Worth noting at that point that the officer's report did mention that revisions to the design of the mast had been sought, but changes hadn't been made by the applicant. I think the suggestion was that this, in the officer's report, is that this mast is of more of an industrial appearance, with the individual antenna being sort of visible on the outside, whereas in the past what we have seen is they're sort of internalized underneath a cowl or a cover, so you have a more streamlined appearance, which can be less intrusive. Do members feel the proposal would have a particular impact on landscape and sensitive views, as set out by policy D2? And to what extent do you feel the proposal would be sensitive to or harmful of the Pitfoddows conservation area? So that's D4. And of course, does the proposal satisfy the tests for new telecoms infrastructure set out in policy CI2? Specifically, has sufficient evidence been supplied to discount siting this telecoms mast on existing buildings, masts or structures in the area, or alternatively even just other locations for an entirely new telecoms mast? So ultimately then just coming to a view whether you feel the proposal complies with the development plan as a whole, and then from there, are there any material considerations that outweigh the development plan in this particular case? I'm happy to help with any conditions and with framing of any conditions if members feel conditions would be appropriate. And I'll just hand back to you there, convener. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. I think that presentation was very clear and helpful for members. So I would ask other two members, do you have any questions for Mr. Evans? Councillor Donnelly's hand, I think, is up.
Yes, thank you, Madam Convener. I'm seeing a bit of a contradiction in the 5G connection, that there hasn't been enough robust tests done of alternative sites. You've said that the officer said, Mr. Evans, that they have to vacate the Shell Woodbank premises that they're obviously sharing at the moment, or I don't know what the arrangement is there. So on the one hand, we're saying they haven't made enough robust look at alternative sites, and yet we're also having a bit of confidence to say that they are limited to the search areas. You know, after they're going to be sort of thrown out of Woodbank, there's a limit to search areas, and yet we're saying that, you know, on the one hand, you know, you haven't been robust enough to find another area. So I'm finding a bit of duplicity in that.
Well, if I can maybe explain a little bit, basically, if we think of the telecommunications network as almost like a patchwork quilt, where each antenna is covering a particular area and they all communicate with one another. Because the operator's been served with a notice to quit for their site at Woodbank House, they'll be left with a hole in the coverage. So they have to find a mast that's geographically somewhere in that same area to fill that hole. So they couldn't, for example, put it, 5 miles away, right next to another pole. That wouldn't work. So I don't think there's any particular argument in the appointed officer's report about the fact that they are geographically limited to somewhere within the local area. I think the officer's report is taking issue with the reasoning for discounting certain sites within that local area as being perhaps a little bit questionable. The example that was raised in the officer's report was some sites having been discounted on the basis that they were right in front of high value residential properties where people would probably object. Well, people might well object, but that doesn't mean the proposal is not acceptable in planning terms. And the level of objection attracted by a particular application doesn't make it unsuitable in planning terms. So I think they were just questioning the rationale for discounting some of those sites. Having reviewed the table that goes along with that plan that I showed, with the alternative locations. Some of the commentary is very brief. You know, it will just say things like, you know, technical reasons or difficulties with access, and that level of information isn't really a lot for us to go on in terms of corroborating that it's fundamentally not possible to deliver a monopole in that site. So I think maybe they were just looking for a bit more in the way of detail. Hope that helps to some extent.
There's a kind of common practice, for example, you've got competition among suppliers, let's say phones for you or Warehouse or whatever, O2, and I've got a mast in there, you know, on the Culture Road or Pitfordles or whatever, and one of my competitors is getting evicted, we'll say, you know, and they come to me and say, well, look, you know, we're having difficulty with planning permission, is there any chance of sharing yours? Well, as a main competitor to me, I'd say, well, I'm sorry, you know, I've got my business here, you find somewhere else type of thing. I don't know how it actually works. You know, to share a roof means you'd have to rent that roof, and then you'd have to have the title deed owner of that roof, but to apply for planning permission to have that antenna on the roof, you know. And you know, and the balance, the problem I'm having here is that connectivity is a big political issue, you know, not only with broadband, but with traffic and rail and the whole lot of it. You know, people are working from home now. There's a lot more use 5G needed, and if people haven't got that, then that backlashes onto you know, representatives of the people, which we are. So I just don't know where we are. You know, the jury's out with this on me, to be honest with you.
Yeah. In terms of mast sharing, that is something that, in terms of the sort of hierarchy of options that operators are required to consider in national policy, mast sharing is encouraged first and foremost. You know, rather than have, I'm maybe a bit out of date with my own terminology, but say O2 and 3 having a mast here and then, you know, half a mile down the road another mast, they are encouraged to, if there is one from an existing operator, to try and reach an agreement about sharing that. Like you say, there are perhaps commercial competition elements at play there that we maybe fully don't appreciate, but given that they will both operators will likely be in that situation at some point, I think in recent years there's been more cooperation and collaboration between them than we'd seen before.
Okay, that's fine, thank you.
Councillor Reynolds, do you have a question?
Yes, I have, please. Gavin, you mentioned the antenna array that's going to be on this one. Most of the antennas that I've seen throughout the city have been for 3G and 4G. This antenna array is totally different. Is that because it's 5G? Because I'm not aware of 5G masts that have gone up, not in my patch anyway.
Yeah, I must admit, Councillor Reynolds, I'm not entirely up to date with what a 5G mast looks like relative to a 3G or a 4G mast. I did make mention of the fact that the appointed officer mentioned the appearance of this mast and how everything was sort of external with the individual antennas visible. I'm not sure if that is some sort of requirement of 5G that is different and sets it apart from earlier iterations of the technology. But previously, we used to see all of the antenna sort of covered, as I said before, by this sort of, you know, plastic housing, if you like, or glass reinforced plastic or something along those lines, so that it gave a more sort of streamlined appearance to the thing, and it maybe didn't stand out in that sort of way. But I couldn't say for certain whether that's now no longer feasible.
Yeah. Again, mention was made there of mass sharing, etc. And again, looking at the arrays there, it could well be that those arrays are catering for other providers, you know, the likes of O2 and 3 and all these others.
My understanding from the applicant's submission is that this is solely for a single operator, this proposal. Right. The existing site at Woodbank, I believe, is shared between 2 different operators, but for whatever reason, I think they're going their separate ways.
Okay. Sorry.
On you go, Councillor Reynolds.
Right. Sorry. It's Greenbelt, conservation area, all that good stuff, but we have a brand new school opposite, which has obliterated the whole idea of a conservation area. When you've got a new school, brand new building, certainly doesn't look architecturally enhanced as far as I'm concerned, whereas the old school at least had the old building there. it also mentions the tree belt, the tree-lined route. Now, there's trees opposite, admittedly, but there's no trees on this side of the road at all. Whereas the further you get into Cults, the more trees there are. So I don't think that's a really good objection to put forward. Also, there's a number of buildings there. What would be the nearest building that would be an old building? Because they're all relatively new, aren't they? Certainly within the 20th century.
That's the sort of question that I dread, LRP, Councillor Reynolds. I could have a quick look and see where the nearest listed building is on our GIS mapping, but I'm afraid my knowledge isn't so encyclopedic as all that.
Don't worry about it. I do apologise for that loaded question.
Members, could I ask, do you feel that you're at a point that you can make a determination for this application, or do you want more questions of Mr. Evans?
I'm certainly quite happy.
Councillor Donnelly?
I'm happy with the questions that I've asked Mr. Evans.
Okay, so, and I too feel that I have formulated a decision on this one. So if you feel content, I think we've been actually quite thorough with this. If you want to discuss it more, or we can actually go to determination. Would you like to state your determination, Councillor Donnelly?
Okay, I know that we have to draw a line on the conservation area. I'm very familiar with Deeside Gardens. A very close friend of mine lived there for years now. I used to visit her and her husband and whatnot. At the end, very close to where this pole is, and I know those houses were built in the 1970s. And the conservation area were just a few yards into it. And my worry is that, as I've said earlier, Madam Convener, connectivity is a big issue. Councillor Reynolds has highlighted that international school across the road, and it's a very modern school that no doubt is full of computers and IT equipment. We've got the Marcliffe further along. I'm a member of Shell Woodbank, I've been for years. So there's a lot of, residential homes and a lot of businesses along there. And if this service is disrupted to them, then I have a major concern there that, as it's not my patch, as you know, I'm Ferry Hill and Torry, that it could kind of backlash. I am minded on this occasion to actually accept the plans to site this antenna, 17.5 meters. It's high, I know, in that location. I'm a bit guilty about it, slightly encroaching into the Pitfoddles conservation area that I respect, because I've got friends live in Pitfoddles as well, and I know it's a beautiful part of Aberdeen and the suburbs. I trained out there at Woodbank years and years ago, and I just feel that I have like a balance to meet here, the green belt, the conservation area, but also connectivity is just a major thing. And that school right across the road and what it offers the children in Aberdeen, I'm minded to go with the talent.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Reynolds?
Yeah, I'm of the same mind, Convener. I think we're talking about coverage of the internet, etc., via mobile phones. 5G is the up and coming thing. We've lagged behind a little bit on 5G in Aberdeen, which we shouldn't have done. I mean, Aberdeen should have been chosen as a 5G city. I don't think it's going to encroach that much. There is already a mast there in Woodbank. This is going to be the replacement mast. I would certainly overturn the officer's decision.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I'm of a different view. I would be upholding the officer's decision. I think it's quite succinct, the reasons for the recommendation to refuse it. I think the visually sensitive bit is strikes a chord with me. Yes, it's not my area, but I am familiar with it. Yes, we need to deliver 5G and connectivity, but I'm also more minded that perhaps the applicant hasn't demonstrated to the council that they have tried to look for other areas that they could actually use. I would be quite concerned also about the height of it, and in relation to the pictures that we saw at the beginning. And although we have said it was said that the green cabinet boxes are not opened that often, I see them quite opened quite a lot where I live. So I think that could be an issue in terms of pedestrians walking by. Mr. Evans, is there enough there in what I have said? Obviously, the recommendation in terms of the will be upheld for the appellant in terms of the vote of Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Donnelly, but is there enough in what I have said as well?
Yes, I think that's fine, Councillor Stewart. I don't know if anybody wants to make more sort of detailed reference to any of the policies, but that's up to yourselves.
Well, I actually felt that in terms of the policies were were quite succinct in terms of D2, D4, on the last page 34 of the report itself. So for me, it's quite clear. I recognise there's a difficulty in perhaps finding other areas, but my view remains the same, that I would have upheld the officer's decision. So, but anyway, it's approved. So is there any condition that we would need to put on to that just to ensure safety? Without not being difficult, but is there anything that we should do about that?
Sure. Nothing in terms of ensuring safety occurs. The only thing that springs to mind is that the applicants in their supporting statement did say that if members were minded to, they could apply a condition relating to the colouring of the mast and the cabinets and things. So something along the lines of, no work could be carried out until such time as details of the colouring had been agreed with the planning authority, just to make sure that it's, fading into the background as much as possible, sort of thing.
I would be content with that. Would you, Councillor Donnelly and Reynolds, would you be content with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Okay. Would there be anything else, just in terms of being thorough?
No, nothing occurs. I don't think we commonly attach much in the way of conditions to these sorts of proposals. It's usually about the colouring to make sure it sort of sits against the sky.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so the decision's obviously made in respect to this application. So, Councillor Donnelly, did you want to say something there?
No.
It's just when you move kind of forward to the screen. I just thought you were
difficult because it's in a conservation area, but I think we went over it, and that's decisions to be made, and
yeah,
you just have to live with that, and hopefully everything works out well.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, members. Mr. Wilson,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Evans.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
For being at the beginning.
Bye bye.
Take care.
Cheers for now. Bye bye.
Bye.